Welcome to the Exam Study Expert Podcast, helping you ace your exams at school and university through the psychology of high performance and the science of studying smarter, not harder. It's my pleasure to introduce your host, the Cambridge-trained memory psychologist and exam success coach, William Wadsworth.
Hello and welcome to the Exam Study Expert Podcast. Today we are talking neurodiversity in education. Whether you're a student with a neurodiverse brain, a parent to one, or a teacher of one, today's episode is rich on practical advice that you can use to help navigate specific challenges that neurodiverse brains of various kinds have in the education system at school and college. Even if you'd consider yourself the most neurotypical learner in the world, I would still really encourage you to stick around for today's episode because it's honestly one of the best conversations about education I've had in a long time. You'll learn a lot and you may just gain a new understanding or appreciation for peers in your circle and what they might be experiencing. My guest today is Christopher Wyatt. He is the real deal when it comes to this stuff. He is a diagnosed autistic with ADHD as well as physical disabilities, and also has extensive experience as a parent to neurodiverse children, a researcher, an educator, an advisor and advocate. He's published academic journals, presented numerous conference papers, and thought about this stuff an awful lot, as you will hear in today's episode. And what I think makes this interview particularly interesting is that everything is underpinned by Christopher's own lived experience. So I really hope you enjoy today's episode. Christopher was a wonderful guest to interview, and there's so much that I personally took away from this conversation. I hope you're going to enjoy it too. Christopher, a very warm welcome to the Exam Study Expert Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I wondered if you could start maybe by just giving us a little bit of your context. So what you do now and kind of what led you to that.
Most of my energy right now is spent advocating for neurodiversity awareness in higher education and in public spaces. So I spend a lot of time working on improving the design of classes, both physical and online courses, so they better meet the needs of students across what we consider the spectrum of neurodiversity, everything from ADHD, dyslexia, to the students like myself who were autistic and ADHD. So what I spend most of my efforts doing is helping teachers and administrators work through the challenges of truly inclusive courses.
Would you be willing to share a little bit of your own experience in education as someone with autism and ADHD?
Absolutely. So I started graduate school late. I went to pursue my PhD at the age of 37. So I had worked in technology, and that's not uncommon. The tech industry and engineering, other fields that are very concrete, clearly defined, organized, those appeal to a lot of us who are neurodiverse, whether it's the autism spectrum or other neurological differences.
Sure.
Something where we fall outside of what people consider normal. If you ask me, neurodiversity is everybody. Two people together is diversity.
Sure.
But those of us who have a diagnosis, in my case, as I said, autism and ADHD, that concrete way of thinking that you find in computer sciences, engineering, finance, those appeal to us. And what I found myself doing was realizing that I still wanted to teach. I wanted to make a difference. So I went back late in life. I completed a master's degree first in composition theory and rhetoric. Then I did a PhD in rhetoric, which is communicating, learning how people talk and how they correspond. Then I did a master's of fine arts in digital technology. And all of this comes together as I seek ways to help individuals like myself, my daughters, communicate with the greater world, especially when we have so often to become our own self-advocates. We have to be aware of our needs so we can communicate them clearly to an audience. And how we communicate that is often limited or constrained by our differences. So, for many autistic people, we find it easier to communicate online or in digital spaces with words. Others find it really helpful to communicate via animation or other visual means. So that's what I'm interested in, is how we can help the neurodiverse population communicate with a broader audience. I think the biggest problem that I face is not always understanding what people are saying, because I am a very concrete thinker. So I struggle with idioms and figurative language. I need concrete examples and concrete expectations. So if someone says, "Get me that paper soon," I don't know what soon is. If a professor says, turn your draft in as soon as possible. Well, what is as soon as possible? Does that mean as quickly as I can write? Does that mean as soon as you're in your office hours? So I need clarity. And I think that a lot of the students I've met and the teachers I've met, that clarity becomes a real issue for the student who is uh, struggling with one of the executive functions. Because clarity becomes very important, I think, to everybody. And I find that's why I talk about it being inclusive design, is because if you give students a very specific date and time, it helps everyone, not just the autistic student or the ADHD student, but it helps everyone if you say things are due Friday by midnight, no later, period. That kind of deadline really helps, and those sorts of expectations. On the other extreme, we have a young daughter who is struggling with writing, but it appears she might be dysgraphic. And what that means is she has trouble writing with a pencil on paper. The words are all jumbled and it makes almost no sense. And yet, if she sits at the computer and types without looking, she can type perfectly. She can communicate verbally, but her handwriting she just gets so confused. And that led people to think, oh, well, she's dyslexic. No, she can read fluently, but she can't write. So dysgraphia isn't one. A less common thing is dyscalculia, where numbers don't make sense to some neurodivergent students. So all of these things, when you design a course and you design a strategy for study and a strategy for success, you have to know that student's individual differences neurologically, just like I need to know mine so I could succeed through the graduate programs I completed. But I also need to know the needs of all my students, my daughters. And I have to recognize that no one design helps everybody, but you can come up with designs that help a lot more students.
Yes. What is helpful for students with neurodiversity is helpful, generally speaking, for everybody. You made the point about being clear on deadlines, clear on expectations. Yeah, of course, that's going to help. That's going to be in everybody's best interest to have that level of clarity. What are some of the other major pieces of advice that you give to instructors?
Every course should have materials available, not only in lecture form that we all go to, but I believe transcript should be available and audio should be available whenever possible. We saw a lot of schools do this during COVID, during the pandemic. They took their lectures and they recorded them and transcribed them. But I really think that we should have been doing that for years before the pandemic, and we should be continuing to do it. Sadly, I see some universities and colleges no longer doing it at the same level. But for the students I work with, they might come to my class and hear me, but they might want to hear the lesson again, or they might want to read the transcript because they do better reading. Some students learn best from different inputs. I have students who will take the podcasts of my lectures and they will listen to the podcast while working out at the campus gym to help them remember what was said. So what we need to do is a multimodal approach to delivery. So I can deliver my lecture in front of the class. Then I can make sure that the PowerPoint slides are online, that my lecture audio is online, video if possible, not always possible, but if possible, the video. And I also then try to do a lot of asynchronous, which means not live, a lot of asynchronous teaching, like question boards. So a student can go to a Slack or a Microsoft Teams or whatever that university is using and leave me a message, and I can get back to them when possible. And then they can read it and think about it. They don't have to have a physical conversation where it's one right after another, they can think about what I said and think about their next question that they post online. So I really do love accommodations like online spaces for discussion that they don't replace, but they supplement what we're doing in the lecture hall.
Great. That's great advice. And is there anything that students with autism in particular maybe really dislike? So things that will make students very uncomfortable or really won't enjoy it.
I have gone into classrooms that have been over decorated, and it sounds silly. You would think, come on, especially at universities, this isn't possible. But there are professors who really love everything they can put on the walls. They'll play music loudly before classes or something. Or there's this idea that young people, especially, want a tremendous amount of stimulation. That we're competing against TikTok, YouTube, whatever the media of the month is. And my feeling on that is the fewer distractions, the better. That doesn't mean that you take down your periodic table and some of your chemistry tips in your chemistry classroom, or your posters about computer components in your tech classroom. I'm not saying remove everything, but what I'm saying is let's not overload students with a lot of distractions. Let's give them just enough that, yes, it looks like an inviting space, but it's not overload. I had a teacher who played rock music before every class. And some of the students were saying, hey, it's nice that they want to be in touch with me, but that's really distracting. And then you just have to say, well, let's talk to disability services and how can we frame this politely? The classroom has to be an inviting space, and some students are easily distracted with a lot of auditory input, or they're distracted by too much visual input. And so it's really surprising to me how many instructors now think that you have to over decorate. You see this more in primary grades, obviously. I'm thinking grades 1 through 5 or whatever, where they really go all out with tons of posters and lots of bulletin boards. And unfortunately for the student who's on the autism spectrum, the autistic doesn't want 101 things to consider at once, or the ADHD student certainly doesn't want 101 things to consider. So I think we need to back off on the idea that we need to overstimulate students to engage them. I think students are engaged by a good conversation and good materials.
Yeah. No, I mean, these are certainly ideas I've been trying to apply more to my own slides when I'm teaching and speaking. I used to have very kind of cluttered slides, and there was a bunch of junk at the bottom. I had my website and icons and all sorts of things going on down at the bottom of the slide, every slide. And over the years, I've just gradually stripped it away and made it as clean and minimalistic as possible to let the central message come through with as few distractions as possible. We were talking a little bit about kind of experiences in the classroom. I imagine another space that can, for some students potentially be quite a challenging space to be in is a kind of exam hall or a testing environment. Do you have any thoughts on that particular situation?
So for myself and my oldest daughter, it's really important to familiarize yourself with where testing will be done. You need to feel comfortable. And so if you can, I would always advise look and visit the testing center or the testing hall where they're going to proctor an exam. Find out what it's like. Find out what you might need in terms of seating, if there's something that's in the room that's going to bother you. But I always think it's important. Preview where you're going to be if you can. Preview it, get ready for it, anticipate it. See if you can't even mimic the space a little bit at home or in your apartment. Maybe you have a space that you have with your flatmate that you can set aside if that's how you're living in graduate school, and set aside a space that you can duplicate as best you can that exam experience. But it's really important for students to know what to expect. We should preview the normal classroom, obviously, but a testing environment, you really want to know what you're going into so you can relax as much as humanly possible.
Definitely. The other sort of situation which came into mind when we were talking that again could throw out some challenges for some students is when your instructor informs you that you have a group task that you need to sort of collaborate with others. Any kind of thoughts on that particular one?
It is a serious problem for many students with differences of all kinds. The challenge that I have as an instructor is we are mandated to require a certain number of hours of group work. And how do you set that up for success when you know that some students struggle with communication? And that goes back to one reason I rely heavily on online forums is I will set up online forums for those groups and instruct them to please communicate digitally online as much as possible, because messages back and forth on your text apps, your phones, those aren't saved as easily. They're not scrolled as easily. But if you're using Microsoft Teams, Slack, or one of the online learning platforms, one of the online learning management systems, those messages, you can scroll through them, you can read them, you can go up and down, search. It makes it a lot easier than just text messaging. So I do tell my students, use the forums, speak digitally, keep a log. And I tell every student, even if you're working in a group, maintain your own calendar too. No, don't trust the group calendar. You need your calendar too, because you know your needs better. So especially for those of us with executive function impairments, where planning and time management are always a struggle. Even with a group, I would sit down and take out anything that was on the calendar that was mine and create my calendar that was just for me. And I would keep it on top of everything else. I would print it out and put it somewhere where I could see it every single day, because I need those calendars and I need to do that, because then I can't rely on the group calendar and I can't rely on others to remind me. I need to remind myself when things are done. And that's just how my brain is. I need to have reminders that sound an alarm. I need written reminders. So, like today, before we were meeting for this podcast, I've got an alert on my phone and on my computer. I've got it written down and printed out. And people might look around and say, wow, you've got a lot of the same calendar. I do. And I need it. I need wherever I go, I need my calendar, because my time management is so poor. I need to say, for these 2 hours today, this is what I'm doing. And I think that works really well with groups, because then what you do is you say, okay, the group wants to meet to work on this project. They want to meet at this part of the library, this room called whatever. So if they're going to meet in, I don't know, Shakespeare's Corner of the library, then they have on their calendar Shakespeare's Corner, and they have it 15 minutes early. So they get there into the library in the study room that's known as Shakespeare's Corner. They're sitting down and they're ready for the team to arrive. Give yourselves time to decompress, especially if you're like me and you have social anxiety. It really helps to get there early, claim the space, get a seat that you want for that group to arrive. But yeah, you need a strategy, and that strategy has to be based on your personal strengths and weaknesses as someone who is neurodiverse.
Absolutely. And we've quite naturally sort of segued into some sort of specific advice for learners and students themselves. There's been a few thoughts that have kind of come up already in terms of things like, when you've got a test or exam, or even just a new set of regular classes in a new room, go and preview it first if you can, in terms of things like, thinking about how you will best manage your time and how you need to sort of create your own systems around that, as you were describing, your own personal calendars can be quite helpful for some students. Getting to places early, written reminders, some really good practical suggestions. What are some of the other things you might suggest to the students?
Well, the first thing I suggest is find a mentor. If you don't have one, you should seek one out, whether it's someone who is at your level is a peer, or it's an instructor. It might be a professor. Admittedly, that's more rare, but you can find a lecturer, you can find a teaching assistant, a lecture leader, but you need someone who is there who can explain some things to you, help you understand the expectations that aren't always stated. It is very difficult to know what a given course might require. It says, well, you write an essay. So you might need to talk to someone who's been in the course before. Well, how long should the essay be? What topics have done well? I think it's really important to know your strengths and weaknesses, but a mentor can really help you. A mentor can really help if you tell that person, okay, I'm good at this, but I'm not so good at this. What should I do for my courses? Here in the United States, a lot of colleges and universities now have autism support groups, autistic self-advocacy centers. Also, on places like Reddit, the online forum, there are groups for autistics in college. So there's autistics in academia forums or subreddits, as they call it on Reddit. Those are important resources because having someone who's been there before you, they can help and tell you what to avoid and maybe tell you what works. But I think that also helps you not feel alone. There's nothing worse than feeling alone. And yet those of us who are neurodiverse, we find ourselves isolated frequently. So finding a mentor is both one of the most important things and one of the most difficult things because it has to be someone you can connect with and who will help you. And like you said, we are challenged socially. So it's difficult to find those mentors, which is why it is so helpful when there is an autistic or a neurodiversity support group on a campus. That is perfect if you can find those places.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. So find a mentor, or at the very least support group. Any other thoughts for students?
Well, for me, as I said, it's all about scheduling. I know that my weakness is time scheduling. For my youngest daughter, she knows that it's any written assignment is going to take her twice as long to complete as it should for the expectations. So she sets aside a lot of extra time for writing assignments. So she starts early and has plenty of time. But I think that's what it is you need to know your strength, your weaknesses, and come up with a strategy that works. Sometimes you need a coach to do that. So sometimes you might need to sit down with someone who has those tricks and tips. As you said, part of what you do is you create exam study strategies. I think that's really important is to connect with those people who are experts and can help you identify the strategy that you're going to need based on your weaknesses. I think it's extremely important though to never let yourself feel lazy or stupid or anything like that. Just recognize that I'm smart enough to know I have an executive function difference, that I need help maintaining a calendar. Or for my youngest daughter, okay, I have challenges with handwriting, but this has to be a handwritten essay, so we don't use AI or anything. So I will give myself an extra 2 days I'll start it now instead of waiting like my classmates are doing. So knowing those strengths and weaknesses, and sometimes it really helps me to review those strengths and weaknesses sometimes before class, sometimes during the semester, sometimes right before exams. But I like to go through and remind myself, okay, this is what I'm good at, and this is how I'm going to succeed is by emphasizing those skills I'm good at. I have become very adept at outlining because I have to. It helps me put things in calendars and planners. So outlining is a strength. So I'm going to use outlining as a study skill to get ready. My time management's poor, so I'm going to set alarms. My navigation, my physical navigation is weak. So I'm going to find the classroom or the lecture hall ahead of time so I don't get lost, because I get lost even driving around my home city. So those are things that you really have to do when you're on track to get through first your baccalaureate and then your advanced degrees. Is you need to know your strengths and your weaknesses and adapt accordingly. That's the big thing is learning to adapt and not feel bad about it.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts on advocating for yourself and having that conversation with, whoever's at the front of the room and running the class and saying, look, this is my situation, and just kind of making them aware of that?
We are really working on self-advocacy with our oldest. She recently got a poor mark, and then on the next exam, she got poor marks again. And part of it was the anxiety from the first time. So anxiety feeds on itself. Once you feel bad, it's hard to get reset and back on track emotionally. So we are working with her to talk to her teachers and talk to her counselor that's available at the school site, and to say, I am autistic, I have ADHD, I am struggling with anxiety, I didn't do well on the first test. How can I do better next time? So we're trying to get her to ask questions framed as, how can I do better as a student? How can I help you as a teacher reach me as a student? And I find that teachers appreciate that. If you're willing to go up to the teacher, the instructor, the lecturer, the professor, and say, I have problems with, and I really want a strategy to overcome that weakness. Most people are willing to help you. If you don't tell them where you need help, they won't know what to do. But if you go up to someone and just kindly say, I have trouble with these tasks, how can I do well in your course? I have never met, though I'm sure they exist, I have never met the professor or the instructor who says, well, that's just your problem. Too bad.
Absolutely.
I think most people want their students to succeed. I mean, we certainly want our students to graduate and become great members of society. That's why we work at research universities. Um, it's a lot of stress on students. I've had a lot of international students, and those students come to the United States to attend a premier university, a research university. They go to the UK to study at an Oxford, a Cambridge, a London School of Economics. And they're already putting themselves under so much pressure. I'm at this research university. I have to be a star. I have to be special. That sometimes just pulling them aside and say, look, I notice you're struggling. How can I help you as a teacher? How can I help you? But it's also so helpful to me when a student comes to my office and says, Dr. Wyatt, I'm really having a problem on this group project. I don't know what the group means by. I say, cool, can we get the group together? How can I help? That's great that you told me this. That is so brave of you and so great of you to come to me. Let's see how we can talk to the group and find out how you can better participate in the group and let them know that you really want to help. So coming to someone and saying, I'm going to self-advocate, it's a great thing and it's a brave thing. And I'd have a hard time believing many instructors, especially no good instructor, is ever going to say, how dare you come to me and ask for help?
Absolutely. Quite a lot of my work is teaching in schools. And the first time I visited a specialist school for students with dyslexia, I was given the advice that the students there really like, a large font on the slide and find it easy to read if it's in Comic Sans. So I was like, great, okay, brilliant. I will adapt accordingly. And that was just such helpful advice to have, back then when I first learned it. A little later, I had a student in a class I was teaching who was obviously kind of struggling to read the handout and wasn't engaging. And I kind of checked in on her and asked if everything was okay. And she said, "Oh, look, I have dyslexia. I can't really read this. It's too small. It's too blurry." And I said, "Oh, would it have helped if it was, bigger and in Comic Sans?" And she was like, "Oh, yes, that would have been great." And I kind of drop into schools for a day at a time each time, but I'm more than happy to do those kind of adaptations if I know in advance, but I can't do it unless I know. So, absolutely. Definitely, +1 for the idea of instructors really appreciate it and are more than delighted to help.
When I'm doing handouts, one of the things that I have started doing is keeping them in Microsoft Word format. And the reason for that is it can be opened in almost anything. You can open it in Pages on the Mac or OpenOffice or LibreOffice. You can open a Word document almost anywhere. And then I show the students, you hit Command A or Control A to highlight all, and then go up and change the font to something you can read. And so by not doing my lecture notes just as a PDF, just as a portable document, but to give them the raw text that they can then enlarge, change the type, change the typeface, empowering them even on my online courses to change the size of the screen and the layout of the screen. For those students who have visual differences, whether it's visual processing or actual visual differences and challenges with sight, giving them that power to make things right for themselves it's liberating for them. And as an instructor, it makes you think of new ways that you can set the information free instead of, well, this is the design I like. I like this blue headline at 18 point, and I like my text at 12 point Courier or Times New Roman or whatever it is. I just put up the raw files, and if the students, even the PowerPoints, I put up as just the PowerPoints or the Google Slides, and I showed them how to alter them and how to print them as outlines or how to change or remove the backgrounds, because there's always that student who might want just the text, and there's an option to print just the text from the slide and not the background. So I showed them those things. And even though I teach business communications and rhetoric, what it really helps, though, is students see if I'm demonstrating how to communicate effectively, when they go into the workplace, they're going to be thinking about their clients, their customers. Maybe they're going to become teachers, and so they're students. But they're going to be thinking of all the different ways they can communicate that allow the audience to change the communication and adapt it and empower the audience to read it, understand it, learn from it. That's what we want to do as teachers. I want you to learn the information. I don't want you to say, wow, Dr. Wyatt produced some really beautiful slides.
Yes.
No one's going to say, good job there. You made a beautiful slide. I want it to be a useful slide. I want it to be a useful lecture note. I want it to be a useful online discussion. And if I worry too much about the presentation layer versus the semantic layer, presentation's important. We know that. Marketing, presentation matters. But in education, we really should prioritize the semantic, the meaning. And the presentation can be there, but we then also have to empower students to alter the presentation so it works for them.
That's a really nice tip. We've talked about quite a few different things. I suppose I'd just throw the floor open to you. Are there any of your other sort of favorite helpful ideas or tips for either instructors or students that haven't come up in the conversation yet?
I will say there is nothing more petrifying in the world than sitting for either your I guess the proper phrase would be your A levels or your SATs or your placement exams. If you're getting ready for medical school, the MCAT, getting ready for law school, the LSAT. Exams create anxiety for everybody. Let's be honest, everybody is anxious taking exams because they decide your next step, whether it's further education or a career path. Those exams are what we in the US call high stakes. The outcomes really matter. And so it's very important to help students who have anxieties and learning differences, neurodiversity of any form. It really is important to help them prepare enough that they feel confident going in, because there's already so much anxiety on these tests and these exams. And I can think of nothing more petrifying than when I was doing your PhD, right? You're doing the PhD and you have an oral exam. So there's 4 people in front of you with PhDs who know everything. They've written the books, and they're asking you questions, and you're supposed to answer them on the spot with an audience. That's a very intimidating atmosphere, whether you're neurodiverse or not.
And they're long as well. Like some of them can go 2 hours or more,
Yeah, they can go on for a whole day. And so for the people thinking that they want to go into academia or want to pursue all the way up through that master's or that doctorate degree, and I do meet a lot of wonderful neurodiverse people, and many of the neurodiverse people I know have PhDs. We love to learn. We get our special interest. And in academia, you can take that special interest that everyone else might think is weird and turn it into a career. I mean, you can become a medievalist. You can become a petrochemical engineer. Your chemistry is very limited to petrochemicals. So you can take a special interest and really take it all the way to the doctorate, right? You become doctor of something. You can be a doctor of so many different things that it's so appealing. But to succeed, you've got to sit through those exams and write those papers. So part of it is reminding the neurodiverse student that you are following your passion. You are really good with this knowledge, this specialized knowledge that not everyone is passionate about. And you can turn that into a degree, but you need to be confident and just accept that, you know this and you're going to be okay. Everyone goes through this process. So the way I prepared was I had friends write down questions for me, even if they didn't know anything about my field, and sit there and duplicate the exam process that we sit through for a PhD, of throwing me questions and me having to answer. Now, whether or not they understood my answer, I don't know, but having to rehearse that really got me into a good routine of doing those oral exams that are the final step of your PhD. The written exams, having friends who are in similar programs give me a question, tell me, okay, now you have till tomorrow at noon to write a paper on this question. So I practiced answering the questions and writing the papers, which I think they only had to be like 5 to 10 pages because you only get one day to write the paper. But doing those exercises before the SAT, I took the practice test, I took the PSAT, and I took the supplemental exams online. Prepare. So when you are in the real situation, yes, it's different. It is different, and it's a little intimidating, but it's a lot less intimidating because I had put myself through it before.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. One of the things I'll often tell all students is try and replicate the conditions of the real thing in your practice as closely as possible, so you can practice and get comfortable with it. Lots of great examples you just mentioned, going and finding a big university library reading room that sort of is a big silent room full of lots of other people working away quietly and taking mock tests in there. For some of my younger students, I've even known students that go and find their parents, mum or dad's office, and they go and bring a exam paper and go and sit in their mum, dad's office somewhere, and they're surrounded by lots of unfamiliar colleagues working away quietly, and that kind of simulates that feeling of being, in that kind of quite alien, slightly intimidating environment of an exam hall. And so, kind of finding these different ways to practice under the conditions of day. It's lots of other great examples that you shared there. So thank you. So many interesting things. And this has been a really, really fascinating conversation, Christopher. If anybody would be interested in kind of finding out more about you and your work, or if you have any kind of favorite resources to point people to, where should we go next?
So the Autistic Me is listed as the Autistic Me on Facebook, LinkedIn, X, which used to be Twitter, though I'm not as active on that platform as I once was. I also use the handle Poet CSW on Blue Sky. I'm finding that Blue Sky is a nice way to connect to people. And my website is tameri.com. And that's for writing, but people like to go there and find out what I do as a writer and a communicator. So if you go to tameri.com/autisticme, it has past episodes of my podcast, lecture notes, and some information about my experiences as an autistic professor.
Superb. Thank you. Well, we will put those links in the show notes to make it easy for people to find. Once again, Christopher, thank you so much for the conversation today. It's been eye-opening, and so many really interesting ideas for people to take away, myself included. So thank you so much once again for the time, and best wishes with the continued work that you do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity, and to those who are using your services as well, I encourage everyone, find your strengths, find your weaknesses. These exams, these tests, you can pass them and you can succeed.
Well, thanks again, Christopher. And if you enjoyed today's episode, you may also enjoy others in our neurodiversity collection that we've gradually been adding to over the years. In particular, I would point you to our episodes on dyslexia study tips. That was episode 113. Rewiring ADHD for students with Eric Tivers from the ADHD Rewired podcast, which some of you might know. That was episode 114. We had autism and studying in 115. And then we had Dr. Matthew Zakreski, a really, really good interview, Gifted and Neurodivergent Scholars Unleashed. That was quite a good sort of overview for lots of different kinds of neurodiversity all at once. And Matt was another really excellent guest. That was episode 140. So do feel free to check those out. I'll list those in the show notes as well, so you can take a look. For now, thanks again for tuning into the show. It's been wonderful to have your company, and I will look forward to seeing you back here next week. For now, wishing you every success, as always, in your studies.
Just before you go, did Did you know you can hire William as your very own coach and mentor to show you the stress-free way to ace your exams by studying smarter, not harder? Find out how at examstudyexpert.com/coaching.